It was my birthday, and I wanted to go to Yemen. My friend said, "What are you, crazy? You're going to get kidnapped." The war on terror had been going on for almost 10 years, and I wanted to get there before the US bombs got there. I traveled extensively in the Middle East in 2000. I'd hung out with Hezbollah in South Beirut. I'd met an entrepreneurial rug dealer in Aleppo who quoted Oscar Wilde and sang show tunes and wanted to immigrate to the West Village. And I wanted to get to an island called Socotra off the Gulf of Aden, a mythical place where 2/3 of the plants and animals are endemic. It has an alien-like topography. It's a haven to Somali pirates, and it's home to the mythical dragon's blood tree, a tree with sap that is blood red, which was an ancient cure-all, also a dye used in makeup in the ancient world. It was a coagulant. It was highly valued, along with frankincense and myrrh, by the Greeks and the Romans. When I was in 9/11 happened, and I was a bartender in New York, and I saw the drumbeat to war. Even the New York Times seemed to be nationalistic and pro-military involvement in the Middle East. And I had to get out of there. I couldn't stand the vibe, so I packed my bags, quit my job, and I was going to backpack through Latin America down to Patagonia. It started with a wedding in Cartagena, and I met somebody, and he said, "You should come to Bogota." I said, "I'm not going to Bogota. I'm going to get kidnapped there." And following a rule, whenever I'm invited someplace and I have a host, I go. I ended up going to Bogota. I never made it to Patagonia. I lived in Bogota for a year and taught English. And so the trip from the Yemen trip was going to start in Turkey, and I was going to go overland down through the United Arab Emirates, Oman, into Yemen, on over to Djibouti, Ethiopia, and end in Rwanda after going through Uganda. And there I was on a bus coming from the tomb of Job, an Old Testament punching bag and a prophet in the Quran. And I was drawn towards the other only tourist on the bus, which was a tall Japanese guy by the name of Takami. He wore a Arab Emirates tunic and a headdress that it looked like he'd bought at a costume shop, and he claimed he was from Malaysia because he was afraid recently in Yemen some Japanese tourists had been kidnapped. In Yemen, the deal is you check in with the police. That's the rule for traveling. The government says it's in your best interest for your protection, but in a failed state, it's often just a shakedown for money, and if you're going to get kidnapped, the government's just as good in selling you out as anyone else, and we were determined not to follow by the rules. And when it comes to kidnapping in Yemen, it's really a method for tribal leaders and elders to extort from the government services like clean water or paved roads, which they don't get because it is a failed state. I met a Liverpudlian oil contractor who had a team member who'd been kidnapped over 10 times, and he loved it. When the elders kidnapped him, they said, "Oh no, not the fat one again. He ate them out of house and home, and he was always treated very well. For the most part, you were treated pretty well." And so there was me and Takami traveling to Mukalla, which is where we were going to get the plane to Socotra. Mukalla is an Al-Qaeda holdout, but also just a normal city where normal people are going about their lives. The only way to get there was a shared taxi, so it was an old Toyota Land Cruiser, bald tires, held together by baling wire. And there are about 15 Yemeni men in there chewing khat, which is the aphrodisiac leaf that everyone chews there. It's a cash crop. It's draining their groundwater, despite themselves. And we were flying through Wadi Hadramaut, which is the ancestral home of Osama bin Laden. And a man taps me on the shoulder from the third row, and he introduces himself as Farhad, an exiled Kathiri prince. And he grew up in Singapore. He's a confessed former junkie. He rants against the police and don't ever give the police any money. Don't ever talk to the police in this country. And so we get to Mukalla, and Farhad sort of attached himself to us, and he says, you got to stay at this hotel. So Takami and I are at this hotel. We get our own hotel room, but Farhad's going to go out for the night with us. And he shows up and storms into the room, and he screams into his cell phone, I've kidnapped an American. And he holds the phone to my ear, and I hear a voice that says, are you American? I'm like, yeah. And he grabs the phone away before anything else can transpire. And he looks at me and holds the phone. He says, my cousin. And he folds the phone up, and that was weird. And he busts out some hash, claims that I wanted it, I don't know, but he starts to roll it up, and I said, look, man, I know what they do with people in this part of the world for drug possession. I don't want anything to do with that. And he sticks his head out the window. I insist, if you're going to smoke that, you got to stick your head out the window. And so he's sticking his head out the window, and this hotel, which is really not very nice like most of the hotels, but it's draped in the largest red, white, and black Yemeni flag you've ever seen. And he's sticking his head out and smoking this joint, and I just have a vision of this flag going up in flames and them coming to get us. And so I look at Takami, and Takami's like, you've got us into this. You've been talking to everyone you've come across. You got to get us out of this. So Takami and I hatch a plan. We're going to get away from Farhad the following morning. So we pack our bags. We start to tiptoe out the lobby, and the night watchman is prone, sleeping in front of the exit, and we have to go through him, and we wake him up, and he hands us a note, and it says, the police are coming for you. Don't give them any money. Signed, Farhad. And I think, how did Farhad know we were leaving? Where's that hashish? What's going on? Have we been kidnapped? Was that a proof of life call? Is this an exchange? And so we have to get out of there, and the hotel manager won't let us leave until we're brought to the police station, because you cannot travel from place to place until you've checked in with the police and gotten the proper paperwork, and he's not going to let us out of his sight until he's handed us over and he's done his job. So he drives us out to the outskirts of town, and there's the most menacing facility you've ever seen, and it has razor bar, and there's a camera with an X through it, and it's clearly a military facility or some sort of police facility. And I look at Takami and I say, and I think if we go in there, we may never come out. And so we kind of turn about face and say, no, thanks, we're good on this, and we start to walk away as quickly as possible. And there's a taxi line there, and we approach one taxi, and the taxi won't have anything to do with us until, two guys walking away from a police station, they're no good, we're not picking them up, or we don't have the proper paperwork, or, I don't speak much Japanese, Takami doesn't speak much English, neither of us speak very much Arabic, and so on. So we eventually get to a taxi that will take us, but they're not taking us to Aden, they're not taking us, the flight's not going to Socotra, but we get to the airport in Mukalla, and we just wait for the next standby flight. And so I eventually did get to Socotra, and it really was a spectacular place. Children caught sharks with their bare hands, and I didn't see any Somali pirates that I know of, but I was sitting there on a white sand beach in this beautiful turquoise lagoon, and there were former Soviet tanks buried into the dunes behind me, and a beautiful shoreline, and I heard that there were poisonous manatees in the water, and I saw a sailfish jump out, slashing at bait fish on the horizon, and I'd seen these Yemeni children catching sharks with their bare hands, and the whole time during this travel, my radar was finely tuned, looking out for self-preservation ultimately. And was I kidnapped? I don't know, but sitting there on the beach, I was too afraid to even go into the water. Thank you.